Hello, I'm Jordan. I am in the midst of a read-along of The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope with Steve Donahue. And last week we talked about the first quarter, chapters 1 through 25. And this week we're going to be talking about the second quarter, which will be chapters 26 through 50. So once again, what I'm going to do is kind of try and give a very brief summary of what takes place in these chapters, and then I will kind of talk about what I think of the book thus far. But just be aware that I'm very, very bad at summarizing. I mean, I'm not great at analyzing either, but summarizing in particular does not come naturally to me. So if that part, I would recommend that you check out Steve's summary before you check out mine's, because he's very good at it. He's a great storyteller, and he has a way of making the book perhaps sound more interesting than it actually is. We'll be getting to that. So one of the foolish things I said last week, it was a dumb thing to say about a book I had only read the first quarter of, was that there's not a whole lot of surprises in The Way We Live Now. I don't think that's entirely true. I think Trollope has a few tricks up his sleeve here, starting right away in chapter 26 with the character of Mrs. Hurdle. So if the first quarter could kind of roughly be set around the theme of money, then I think you could perhaps argue that the second quarter has been set around the theme of marriage, particularly like prospective marriages and engagements and broken engagements and things like that. So Mrs. Hurdle is a character who comes into Paul Montague's life. This is a woman he met on one of his previous business trips to the United States. He fell in love with her, she fell in love with him, he proposed, and she accepted. So this is a woman that he is actually engaged to. This is the first time we're hearing about this, I believe. And of course, he is no longer willing to marry her. First of all, of course, because he is in love with Hedda Carberry, but also he has since learned some very troubling rumors about Mrs. Hurdle's past and discovers that he really knows not very much at all about her. It's been fun reading that as an American because just the way that Trollope writes about what he sees as life in the far west is quite far west of America is quite charming. One of the rumors about Mrs. Hurdle is that she apparently shot a man in Oregon. And there's a great scene where Trollope says something like, you know, sometimes you may have to shoot a man, especially in Oregon, which I live in Oregon, so that was quite delightful. So anyways, Paul says to her, you know, I'm not going to marry you after all. And she kind of hints that she will not suffer that quietly. But she says in the meantime, okay, well, at least since I'm here, you know, spend some time with me, which he agrees to. And there's a great scene where they go to the theater. You get to see them together, and you see that they actually are quite well suited together, I would say. And they both really enjoy it, but of course there's that cloud hanging over it and the fact that this is not something that perhaps they should be doing, and it's very well done. So the other engagement or proposal is also a bit of a surprise, and that's that the editor of one of the papers that Lady Carberry writes for, Mr. Brune, I believe it's pronounced Brune because Sir Felix at one point makes a snarky comment like, that editor fellow who won't call himself Brown. Mr. Brune proposes to Lady Carberry in a very wonderful, kind of nuanced scene. And she, after some thought, rejects him for a few reasons. Obviously, one of them is that she doesn't want anyone to come between her and her son, but also, kind of surprisingly, she doesn't want to subject her son onto any husband that she may have. And then there's the character of Ruby Ruggles, who we met previously in the first quarter as Sir Felix's kind of country girl. And we learn that she is engaged to a man wonderfully named John Crumb. And there's another fantastic scene where John Crumb comes to Ruby's cottage, where she lives with her grandfather, and brings his friend with him, who is quite eloquent, at least in comparison to John Crumb, who is extremely laconic. And it's a great scene where Ruby lays it all out, says, I won't marry you. Her grandfather becomes violent. She ends up running away to London in the hopes of marrying Sir Felix, believe it or not. While there, she stays in the same place where Mrs. Hurdle is staying, incidentally. Long story short, in one of the nights that she goes out with Sir Felix, he tells her, I'm not going to marry you, I'm not going to marry anyone. And she is brokenhearted and upset. And then that brings us to Sir Felix and the final prospective marriage, which is, of course, between him and Marie. So at the end of the last quarter, we learned that Felix kind of had this idea that he would purchase a bunch of shares and sell them at a profit in order to make some money. That idea falls through because he does raise the money to purchase the shares, but it's a great scene where he feels great about having finally done that, and then he discovers, well, I don't actually have anything to show for that. I don't have any shares. So he repeatedly asks for that from Mr. Melmotte, doesn't get it, so he finally ends up asking for his money back, which he is not able to get either. Instead, he gets £200 loans here and there. He calls them loans. They're actually technically his money. Again, Melmotte is a huge part of all of this throughout. I'm just focusing on the marriages, but of course everything revolves around Melmotte. Earlier, I forgot to mention, Paul Montague finally kind of gave an ultimatum and said at a board meeting, okay, well, if you guys will not tell me how this all works, I'm going to go public with the fact that me as a director, I don't know how it works. At which point Melmotte tries to buy him off in a number of ways, or at least to get rid of him. He fails at all of those, so that's still kind of up in the air. So anyways, back to Sir Felix. He decides finally that he will simply run away with Marie, elope with her, in the hopes that either Melmotte will come to terms with that and settle the fortune on her anyway, or perhaps that Marie will be able to essentially steal some money from Melmotte that has been settled in her name. So this is all arranged by Marie. One of the great surprises of the book so far is the character of Marie, who started out as this very meek kind of non-character, but has really taken her fate into her own hands because she thinks that she's in love with Felix. What she's really in love with is the idea of running her own life finally, which is refreshing. So she, with the help of her servant, her maid, arranged for this elopement, and Felix just kind of agrees to it. And then, of course, the night before, Felix has been able to raise some money in order to make this happen, and he gambles it all away and ends up going home drunk and going to sleep at the same time that Marie is setting out to meet him in Liverpool, where they intend to set off for New York, I believe. On her way there, or I think actually when she gets to Liverpool, we find that somehow her father has discovered about the elopement and has sent someone to come bring her home, which he does. And that's where these chapters kind of end, roughly. So, like I said, one of the things I have been enjoying is the fact that there are some curveballs in the narrative, which I wasn't expecting. But also, I think I underestimated Trollope as a writer. I think his prose is perhaps more subtle than I had originally given him credit for, particularly in the way he writes about characters. It's done in a very, very clear, concise way, but it's still very, very nuanced and complex and quite lovely at times. I'm going to give you an example of that. This is the scene in which Mr. Brune proposes to Lady Carbury and her shock at that incident. Uh-oh. Okay, sorry, I got this. Okay, so it says, mixed with her other feelings, there was a tenderness which brought back some memory of her distant youth and almost made her weep, that a man, such a man, should offer to take half her burdens and to confer upon her half his blessings. What an idiot, but what a god! She had looked upon the man as all intellects, alloyed perhaps by some passionless remnants of the vices of his youth, and now she found that he not only had a human heart in his bosom, but a heart that she could touch. How wonderfully sweet, how infinitely small. That is just such a wonderful mixture of kind of condescension and tenderness, and I just thought it was very, very well done. But just the characters in general are developing in ways that I hadn't expected from Trollope. Like I said, Marie Melmotte is becoming quite an interesting character. And also something I wanted to mention last time was Trollope's portrayal of women is very refreshing too. They are just as well-rounded and given just as much attention and justice as his male characters. They're not just, blocked in kind of stick figures of the way Victorians thought that females should be, which is kind of the impression I get from like much of Dickens, for example. No, these are characters that are every bit as alive and convincing as his male characters, which is great. And that brings me to the greatest surprise of the book so far, and my favorite aspect of the book so far, and that's Mrs. Hurdle, who I love, because I think partly she feels like a character from a different kind of writer coming into this book, like perhaps a character from a Dickens novel or a Bronte's novel. She is larger than life. And it's made me realize perhaps what I'm not liking about this book. It's no fault of Trollope's, but I prefer I don't want... Okay, so when it comes to characters, I admit that Trollope has created very, very convincing characters. They feel like people I know. But the thing is, that's not really what I want or expect from fiction. I want characters that are larger than life. And I get that in Mrs. Hurdle. And the way she kind of throws a wrench into the machinery of this book is really thrilling. She is just a fantastic character. She's a little frightening, and she's a little dark. But it's great. And I honestly believe that she is a much more attractive character than Hedda Carberry. So I'm a little confused on one level as to why Paul would be willing to give her up for Hedda. But on the other hand, I understand it. She is frightening. She's a very frightening kind of character, but not in an unsympathetic way. She's not a villain at all, at least not yet. So yes, Mrs. Hurdle has been one of the great surprises of the book so far, and she's one of the reasons that I really look forward to continuing. But overall, I am liking this book more than I did in the first quarter. I think it's developing in ways, like I said, that I didn't expect. I think I'm learning to appreciate Trollope's writing style more. Like I said, particularly in the way he's able to portray characters in such an easy way. He makes it look easy. So, right, those are my thoughts on the book so far. I know a few of you are reading along with us, so please let me know what you're thinking about it. And yeah, thank you for watching. Have a good day.